right, get ready, because today we're going to really dig into something pretty wild, science fact.
Yeah, it's not every day you hear a term quite that striking, right?
Exactly. We're going way beyond, the typical theories and hypotheses and all that.
We're talking about a realm where, get this, consciousness itself might be the key.
The key to what? Come on, don't leave us hanging.
The key to unlocking some of the universe's biggest mysteries.
I like it. So where do we even begin with something like this?
Well, the really captivating part is that ScienceFact actually builds on what we already know about science.
It's not like starting from scratch.
Right, it adds this whole new dimension. It's called T-consciousness fields.
TCFs?
Yeah, TCFs. And they could completely revolutionize how we understand, well, pretty much everything.
There's this team over at Cosmointel Inc. It's a research center up in Canada.
They're pushing the boundaries of what we thought was even possible, and the result,
It's exciting.
to put it mildly, they're fascinating.
Okay, so back up for a second. What are these TCFs exactly?
TCFs are fields, much like known fields in physics, like the gravitational field, in that they can influence matter or energy in their presence. However, the key difference is that TCFs themselves are neither matter nor energy, but they contain information that interacts with matter or energy and influences any system placed within them. Basically, these fields are the framework where the non-physical interacts with the physical. And they, TCFs, are basically subcategories of T-consciousness.
So if conventional science is looking at, the hardware of the universe,
Then T-consciousness is the software, like a code underneath that makes everything run.
I think I get it, but how do you even start to study something you can't see or measure?
That's where Cosmointel is doing some seriously cool stuff.
Lay it on us.
They're not trying to, capture TCS directly. Instead, they're looking at the effects.
Effects on what?
The effects that these fields seem to have on things we can measure.
So they're trying to figure out how these things actually affect, the world around us.
And one thing that's interesting is that this isn't just some, out there theory. It's actually a sub-branch of something called the Erfan Keyhani Halgheh school.
Yeah, we talked about Erfan Keyhani Halgheh in our previous podcast. I highly recommend our listeners to check it out.
It's kind of the foundation for ScienceFact.
So the theory behind it all.
Yeah, kind of. They explore consciousness and all that from a different perspective. And then ScienceFact takes those ideas and tries to look at them scientifically.
So they are bridging the gap between spirituality and science.
Yeah, exactly. Two worlds that don't usually meet.
That's pretty cool. And the founder of all this is Mohammad Ali Taheri. We also talked about him in our previous podcast and the challenges he faced in presenting his knowledge more broadly today. He seems like a pretty big deal in all this.
Oh, yeah, he's a key figure. He actually established ScienceFact back in 2020.
Okay.
And the difference in the concept of consciousness by Taheri, compared to all others, lies in its expansive and deeply fundamental nature and the integral role of consciousness in existence.
Right.
In order to avoid confusion with other definitions of consciousness, Taheri introduced the term T-consciousness, with T representing his last name. T-consciousness serves as the third constituent of the universe, in addition to matter and energy. As part of this conceptualization, Taheri introduced the concept of Taheri consciousness fields, TCFs, which are unique fields with a non-material and non-energetic nature.
Right.
But the concept of consciousness today is often understood as encompassing the human brain and mental activities, and at times it is simply defined as the state of being conscious. But T-consciousness by Taheri goes much, much deeper and is far more fundamental. It is literally what has brought this universe into existence and what is driving it. It is the missing link that answers the question of how this entire physical world came to be. That's what highlights the difference between Taheri's definition and all others. This highlights the difference between these two definitions.
That's interesting. How do we study something like T-consciousness, especially if you can't really observe it directly?
Well, that's where the methodology of ScienceFact gets really interesting. They use double-blind studies.
Like the gold standard in research.
Exactly. So neither the researchers nor the subjects know who's being exposed to these TCFs.
To eliminate bias.
Exactly. They're trying to see a clear cause and effect, even though they can't actually measure the TCF itself directly.
That's pretty smart.
Yeah.
But if they can't measure the TCFs, how do they know they're working? What are they actually looking for?
They're looking for changes, measurable effects on matter and energy.
So if they're studying bacteria, they look for changes in growth rate.
Exactly. Or maybe they'd observe how particles behave differently in a physics experiment.
So it's about looking for the effects even if they can't see the cause directly.
Yeah, you can't see the wind, but you can observe the trees moving. It's the effects that tell you something's happening.
I like that analogy. That makes sense.
Yeah.
But still, this whole concept is pretty wild. Consciousness actually affecting the physical world. That's a big change in how we see things.
It is. And I'm sure there's some pushback.
Oh, I bet. So how are they dealing with it? Is the scientific community on board?
It's definitely an uphill battle, going against centuries of established science.
Yeah, I can imagine.
There are no independent researchers who are experts in T-consciousness as of yet, because it is a very new field. No one possesses the knowledge to peer review articles in this area, making it a rather unusual challenge.
So who's peer reviewing their research? That's important for it to be taken seriously.
Right now, they're publishing their research in their own journal. It's called the Journal of Cosmointel.
Okay. And is that peer reviewed?
It's open access, so anyone can read it, which is a good first step.
At least it's transparent.
Yeah, and they're presenting at some big conferences, too, like the Science of Consciousness conference.
Okay, so they're not shying away from the scientific community.
Nope. They're actively trying to get people talking and engaged.
That's good. So how do they deal with that?
Well, Cosmointel is very clear about their commitment to doing real science. They're following the scientific method to explore these things.
So they're saying, let's be open-minded, but let's do it the right way.
Exactly. They welcome criticism, but it has to be based on evidence and, real scientific arguments.
So like they're walking a tightrope, trying to be rigorous and scientific, while exploring something that completely challenges our understanding of reality.
Yeah, and that's what makes it so fascinating.
It's definitely not your average research project. But what really intrigues me is the potential. If TCFs can really impact matter and energy, the possibilities are endless.
Oh yeah, we're just scratching the surface here.
Let's talk about some of those potential applications next. They're not just focusing on one thing, they're exploring all sorts of areas.
Yeah, that's a good observation. They're kind of casting a wide net, seeing where these TCFs might have an impact.
Makes sense since it's such a new field.
Exactly.
Well, give me some examples. What are some of the areas they're looking into?
They're looking at everything from microbiology.
Microbiology, like studying bacteria and viruses.
Yep, literally seeing how TCFs affect them. To potential application in complementary medicine and even the treatment of cancer.
Complementary medicine. Huh, that's interesting. Seems like a big jump from bacteria to alternative therapies.
It might seem that way, but remember, we're talking about consciousness potentially affecting the physical world. So if it can influence bacteria, why not the human body and how it heals?
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Over the past few decades, it seems that many treatments have been successfully carried out on humans using this method.
That's interesting. But what kind of complementary medicine are we talking about here, like acupuncture and stuff?
Not exactly. They're looking into two specific areas they call Faradarmani and Psymentology. They're both based on the idea that TCFs can be harnessed to help people heal and feel better.
Okay, break those down for me a bit. What exactly are they?
We talked about Faradarmani in our previous podcast.
Right.
And we'll definitely dedicate a full episode to it in the future.
Okay.
Faradarmani could roughly translate to beyond healing or meta treatment.
Interesting.
To summarize, Faradarmani is a complementary medicine that works through the influence of T-consciousness fields on the body, mind, and psyche. What's interesting is that Mohammad Ali Taheri views the mind and psyche as separate entities and provides a distinct definition of the brain. His redefinitions all sound quite unprecedented and thought-provoking. We'll delve into these concepts in detail in future podcasts.
Right.
When a patient enters this consciousness field, healing and recovery take place, whether the illness is physical or psychological.
Okay.
Interestingly, the type or severity of the illness doesn't matter. And according to research and experience, there's a 70% chance of recovery for patients.
Sounds like a significant success rate. How it works exactly?
They connect the patient to the Cosmic Consciousness Network. They call it the CCN.
The CCN, isn't that what they mentioned in their methodology? The source of TCFs.
That's the one.
We talked about it in the previous episode, too.
By tapping into this network, Faradarmani facilitates the transmission of information upgrades from CCN to the patient.
Right.
Faradarmani, or TCF user, is a person who can connect to the Cosmic Consciousness Network. A person who can do Edisol, as we mentioned before in the previous episode.
And that promotes healing without actually touching them.
That's the theory. No drugs, no surgery, just consciousness fields.
That's pretty wild. Okay, what about Psymentology? What's that all about?
Psymentology focuses more on mental and psychological well-being.
So using TCFs for the mind instead of the body.
In a way, yeah. But remember, the mind and body are connected.
So it can affect both?
Right. But the potential is pretty fascinating.
Yeah, like opening up a whole new world of healthcare, operating on a level we barely understand.
Exactly. And that speaks to how ambitious ScienceFact is. They're not just trying to prove these TCFs exist. They're trying to figure out how to use them to help people.
It's a pretty noble goal for sure.
Yeah.
But it sounds like it's going to be a tough road. I mean, this whole area of research is bound to be controversial.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm really interested to hear about some of their specific findings. Have they had any breakthroughs?
Oh, they have. And that's what we'll explore next.
Okay, let's talk breakthroughs. What have they actually discovered?
Well, you got to remember, this is all still pretty new. So a lot of what they found is preliminary.
Sure, but it's got to be something juicy.
Right.
What really caught your eye in the materials?
Their work in T-consciousness biology is pretty fascinating. They're basically looking at how TCFs can affect things at the cellular level.
Whoa, so not just like the whole body, but individual cells.
Exactly. They've been doing experiments on different types of cells, even cancer cells. And they've seen some interesting changes after exposing them to certain TCFs.
Like what kind of changes? Give me the good stuff.
They've seen changes in cell growth rate, how the cells are actually structured, and even changes in gene expression.
Hold on, so you're saying they could actually manipulate cells using TCFs? That's huge, right? For medicine and all that?
It could be revolutionary.
Yeah.
Think about it. If they can target specific cells and change how they behave using TCFs, you could treat diseases in a whole new way.
Wow. Yeah, like targeting cancer cells without chemo or surgery.
Over the past few decades, since Faradarmani and Psymentology were introduced, countless case reports and testimonials have emerged, documenting the treatment of various illnesses, including incurable ones, to the amazement of doctors and their medical teams,
Right.
leaving them with no other explanation than to call it a miracle.
It's truly remarkable, and I'm confident that T-consciousness is worth being studied and explored by science. And that's just one thing, right? What else have they found?
They're also exploring this thing called biological dark energy.
Okay, now that definitely sounds like sci-fi. What is that?
It's a new idea, but basically it suggests that there's a lot more going on in living organisms than we can currently see or measure.
So like some hidden energy source within us?
Kinda. They think TCFs might be the key to understanding this dark energy and what it does.
It's like our current understanding of biology is just scratching the surface.
Exactly. There could be a whole other level we haven't even tapped into yet.
This is wild. It's like with ScienceFact, there's always something more to uncover. Always another layer.
That's what makes it so exciting. It reminds us that we don't know everything. There could be all sorts of forces at play that we're just starting to understand.
Makes you wonder what else is out there. But you mentioned they've presented some of their research at conferences, right? What's the reaction been like?
While presenting research on TCFs to mainstream scientists is definitely going to raise some eyebrows, but they're not afraid to put it out there. For example, at the European Association for Cancer Research Congress, they presented some pretty interesting findings from a study on liver cancer in mice.
Oh yeah, I read about that. Didn't they find that TCFs actually had a significant effect on tumor growth?
They did. The mice that were exposed to specific TCFs had way less tumor growth compared to the control group.
So are we talking about treating cancer with consciousness? That's insane.
Well, it's pretty mind-blowing. But it makes sense, though. If consciousness is truly the building block of life, then it's not surprising that it could also repair the body and heal diseases.
Right. Feels like we're on the edge of a huge shift in science. This could change everything, not just biology and medicine, but physics technology, even what it means to be human.
That's the beauty of it. We're only just beginning to see what TCFs can do, and who knows where it'll lead us.
It's a story definitely worth sticking with. It's one thing to publish research, it's another to see it actually make a difference, right? So besides all the medical stuff we talked about, what other areas are showing promise for TCFs?
Well, there's this field called biomimetics. It's basically taking inspiration from nature to create new technologies and materials.
Okay, I've heard of that.
And what Cosmointel is exploring is if TCFs can actually influence how materials behave at a molecular level.
Whoa, hold on. Are we talking about materials that, like, self-heal or something, adapt to their environment?
You got it. That's the kind of stuff we're looking into. Sounds futuristic, right?
Big time. What else?
Well, they're even looking at how TCFs could influence things like thermal luminescence.
Thermoluminescence. Break that down for me.
So it's basically when a material emits light when you heat it up.
Huh, interesting.
Could be huge for developing new sensors, even for understanding matter itself in a whole new way.
Wow, so we're talking about connecting biology, physics, even cosmology, all through this lens of T-consciousness.
Exactly. And that's what's so exciting about ScienceFact. It's not just about moving forward in one specific area. It's about creating a whole new way of understanding the universe, the forces that make it tick.
I like it. So for our listeners who are like, okay, I'm sold, tell me more.
They're even looking at something called apoptosis. It's basically programmed cell death, like getting the cancer cells to self-destruct.
Okay, now that's some next level stuff.
It's early days, but their initial findings have definitely caused a stir, especially after they presented their research at that big European Association for Cancer Research Congress.
So real results, potential for new treatments. I'm already hooked. What else are they looking at?
Well, they're diving into Alzheimer's research, too.
Really?
Yeah, investigating if TCFs could, somehow protect those brain cells from damage.
From the damage Alzheimer's causes.
Exactly. And get this, they're even looking into infertility treatments using TCF.
Wow, that's quite the range. So Cosmointel is tackling some serious real-world problems here.
Absolutely.
And they're not being secretive about it, right? They're out there presenting at these big science conferences and everything.
Yeah, for sure. They were at the Science of Consciousness conference, which is like the big leagues for this kind of research.
And they've got their own journal too, right?
Yeah, the Scientific Journal of Cosmointel gets all their research out there. They want that open dialogue with the whole scientific community.
Good for them.
Yeah. And one of the biggest challenges they face is that a lot of the scientific community isn't really accepting of all this.
Yeah, it's such a radical idea.
Exactly. A lot of scientists are hesitant to even consider that consciousness could have such a big impact on the physical world.
I get that. It is a huge shift in thinking.
Yeah.
But it seems like Cosmointel's doing things the right way, focusing on research and open dialogue.
Yeah, they're not afraid of criticism as long as it's constructive and, based on actual evidence.
So they're saying, challenge us, but bring your A game.
Exactly. And another big challenge is misinformation.
Right. We talked about that earlier. The internet's a breeding ground for all sorts of crazy theories, especially with something as groundbreaking as this.
Exactly. People hear little bits of information, take it out of context, and spread it without really understanding the science behind it.
It's like a game of telephone. The message gets all jumbled up along the way.
Exactly. And that can really damage the reputation of ScienceFact and confuse people about what this research is really about.
So what are they doing to fight back against that?
Transparency is a big part of it. They're publishing all their research in their own journal, the Scientific Journal of Cosmointel, and it's open access, so anyone can read it.
Smart. No paywalls, no secrets, just open access to the research for anyone who's actually interested.
Exactly. And they're also trying to engage with the public directly through their website and social media, trying to get accurate information out there and address those myths and misconceptions.
It's like they're really trying to educate people and build trust.
They are, and it's not easy. But they want to make sure ScienceFact is being evaluated based on real evidence, not speculation or misinformation.
It's like a battle against all that noise out there.
Yeah.
But their dedication to actual science is pretty impressive.
It is, and it sets them apart from those who might try to take advantage of people's interest in all this for their own gain.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the hype with something so extraordinary.
For sure. But Cosmointel's sticking to their guns, focusing on meticulous research and careful analysis. No grand claims, no miracle promises, just this is what we've observed, this is how we did it, and this is what it could mean.
That's a refreshing change of pace. It's about the long game, the pursuit of knowledge.
Absolutely. And that's why I find ScienceFact so fascinating. It's a journey of discovery, a quest to understand consciousness and its role in the universe.
What does all this really mean? Why should people care about this whole T-consciousness science fact thing?
At the core of it, this research is making us rethink what it means to be human, to be conscious.
Okay, I'm listening.
What if consciousness isn't just some bioproduct of our brain, but a fundamental field that is a part of everything?
Now, that's a big idea.
It changes how we see ourselves, our place in the cosmos. It's pretty profound.
It's like we're on the cusp of this whole new era of scientific understanding, right? Where we're finally starting to get a glimpse of what reality really is.
Exactly. And it's a reality that goes way beyond what we can see and touch and hear.
A reality where consciousness plays a central role.
Yes, they call it the age of consciousness.
And with that understanding, I imagine, come a ton of new possibilities.
Absolutely. We've talked about medicine, biomimetics, but it goes way beyond that. We're talking about revolutionizing how we interact with the world, with each other.
It's a journey I'm definitely sticking with. So to our listener who suggested this deep dive into ScienceFact, thanks for sending us down this rabbit hole.
If you're as fascinated by this as we are, we encourage you to keep exploring.
where should they go?
Cosmointel is a great website, www.cosmointel.com. And if you really want to dive deep, there's the Journal of Cosmointel, which is all online at www.journalofcosmointel.com.
Well, that's it for this deep dive into science fact and T-consciousness.
Hope you enjoyed the ride.
I know I did. It's given us a lot to think about, and I'm sure we'll be revisiting this as more discoveries are made.
Definitely.
Until next time, keep those minds open and never lose that sense of wonder. We'll catch you all later.